Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us live for today's webinar. My name is Mathilde, and I'm the Manager of Marketing here at Amity, where we provide customer success managers with a platform they need to retain, grow, and grow their customers at scale. So I'm super thrilled to be hosting today's webinar with our amazing friends over at the Success League on the topic of executive relationships for customer success. Kristen Hayer is the founder and the CEO of the Success League, which is a consulting firm focused on customer success. And Kristen helps her clients develop metrics and goals, assess customer touch points, select technology for customer success, and design playbooks as well, and a lot of other stuff as well. She's super knowledgeable. And we've actually hosted a series of webinars with Kristen, and this is not the first one we're doing with her. And we've covered topics like one-to-many engagements, leadership skills, and compensation plans. And we always get such a positive response to those sessions, so that's why we keep on asking her to come back. And I'd really like to encourage everyone to check out the recordings if you're interested. So at the end of the webinar, there will be an exit survey, and if you want to leave your email in there and a note, I'll be more than happy to send you those recordings as well. So now, before we do get started, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping notes with everyone. Of course, we'll be on Twitter, so join us and use the hashtag CSWebinar, tag us at GetAmity, at Kristen Hayer, and share your screenshots and your comments, and we'd love to engage with you. Of course, we are recording the webinar, and we will be sending the recording and the slides after the webinar, so expect an email from me before the end of the week with all of those links and everything, and you can share them with anyone that you'd like. And we also do have a Q&A planned at the end of the webinar. So at any point, you can open your Q&A panel in Zoom and send us your questions. And we also encourage everyone to be active in the chat during the webinar as well. And yeah, don't wait until the end. We'll just collect all of your questions, and then we'll answer as many as we can at the end. And for anyone joining us for the very first time this week, Amity, to give you a little bit of context, provides a customer success management software that allows things like health scoring, tracking engagements, automating emails, analytics and health scores, and much more. And if you want to learn more, you can request a demo online, and you should actually be able to find a direct link in the chat right now for 3 months, no strings attached pilot offer. And you can also check us out online at the link that's on the slide right now. And I hope this gives you some context around why we're here today, hosting webinars about customer success. But that's all that you're going to hear about Amity, of course, because I'm super excited to introduce today's presenter, Kristen Hayer. Thanks, Kristen, for joining us. They're all yours.
Thanks, Mathilde. I really appreciate the opportunity to join today and to talk to the group about what I think is a really important topic in our field, engaging with the executive level of folks at your customers. And so what we're going to really be covering today is how to think like an executive. It's important for you to be able to do that in order to really engage with that level of person in your client organization. We're going to talk about what that executive relationship should look like as you go through the life cycle of the client. We're going to talk a little bit about how to understand the things that customers value about your solution and how to ask great questions that get to the bottom of what they value. And then we're going to talk about how you talk about results. So what kind of results you're getting from the work that you're doing with your client. We're also going to talk about how to make sure that you always provide value as you're working with an executive level client, and then some best practices around that as well. We've got a shorter period of time, so I think we're going to go until about 10:25 today, and then we're going to open it up for questions at the end. So please do put in questions as you have them into the Zoom, I think chat is where we want to see those, or Q&A. So make sure you're putting them there, and that way when we get to Q&A at the end, we'll have lots of questions to answer. All right, with that, I want to talk about thinking like an executive. So the reason we're talking about this today is it's really important to build a relationship with both the key contact and your regular, you know, some people call them a key contact or a you know, you've got a key contact and then you've got your budget owner or your executive or the person who's actually making the buying decision. So, you know, whatever terminology you use for those two different groups in your organization, it's important for you to have a relationship with them both. The key contact, your admin level contact, is going to be deciding if they like how your product works or not. And the person at the executive level, that buyer level person, is going to be deciding if your product is delivering the business value that they expected. And that's such an important distinction. It's really the distinction between a focus on your product and a focus on their business. Many CSMs make the mistake of only focusing on the key contact person or their champion or the admin, and they neglect that executive level, buyer level relationship. Without that insight into whether or not the executive sees value in your solution, it means you're flying blind and you risk unexpected churn. And I'm sure all of us at some point or another in our careers as CSMs have gotten hit with churn that we just didn't expect. And often I find that that comes from not having that relationship at the executive level. So that's such an important part of what you're doing as a CSM. In order to do that effectively, you need to think differently about the kind of communication that you do with that executive level person. And to just kind of give you a feel for what that conversation should be like, I want to give you some insight into what it's like to be an executive. I've been a vice president twice, and you know, that's in both of those positions, I was a part of a executive leadership team. And as an executive, you have a very different focus than you do if you're on the front lines or if you're somebody who's more of a manager and you're in charge of a team, but you're not necessarily leading the strategy of the company. So the things that executives are doing day to day is things like creating 1 to 5 year plans for key metrics and goals and initiatives for the company and their team. They're monitoring changes in the market that might impact the direction of the company, and they're thinking about their approach to those things. They're developing tactics to outperform competitors and grow their market share. They're managing the performance of their team against the goal and the metrics of the company. And they're really working on positioning their team and company to go after things like funding or an exit strategy that they might have. So these are all very high-level strategic things. What I want to emphasize here in this slide is really that in order to think like an executive, you need to think in a way that is strategic, that is long-term, that is business-focused, not product-focused, that is results-focused, not activity-focused, and is oriented toward metrics and goals, because executives care about why things are getting done and the direction, the what is getting done, but they don't care how it gets done as long as the results they're getting are the results they want to see for their business. So what that means is they don't care about your product. They only care about the business results that your product is going to provide. If a magical unicorn could come along and magically provide the results that they want, that's fine with them as long as it costs the same or less than your product. So they don't want to see usage statistics. They don't want to see anything about your product. All they want to know is if you're helping to produce the results and the return on investment that they expected when they purchased your solution. So it's really important to kind of get into that more business-oriented, strategy-oriented mindset when you're trying to build a relationship with an executive, because that's how they think. In thinking about the relationship itself over the course of the customer life cycle, I think this first chart we've got here is pretty typical, and you're all really familiar with this. This is the key contact relationship, right? So, you know, usually at the very beginning, there's some sort of technical discovery that happens. There's the onboarding process. Your key contact is probably pretty heavily involved in that. There's enablement or training the users or the team on how to use your solution. Over the course of the relationship, there's some communication about best practices and getting better usage and using the solution more fully. And so that's happening throughout the relationship. And then there's the renewal conversation that happens annually or however often the customers come up for renewal. So that's the kind of activities that we're all really familiar with in customer success. If you're building an executive relationship, it kind of mirrors that in some ways, but it's a really different focus. So the executive relationship's still proactive, but it's strategic instead of tactical. So ideally, at the beginning of the customer relationship, you are also engaging with the executive. And what you're talking about at that point is value discovery. So instead of doing technical discovery in order to do a great implementation, you're doing value discovery to learn what the customer values most about the solution and what they expect to see from you. You're doing goal setting with the executive. So you're really kind of taking those maybe vague expectations and you're turning them into concrete goals for what you hope to achieve with your solution. You're sharing preliminary results when you're, when you're seeing at the key contact level, the enablement phase, that's where new users are getting up to speed on the solution. That's when you can communicate to the executive preliminary results. How are the team adopting the solution? Has there been any feedback from the field in terms of initial results and achieving goals? Have there been any recent wins? Things like that. So you can talk about preliminary results at that point. New initiatives, that's throughout the whole life cycle of the customer, and that's where you can really dial in your goals that you set and make sure that they're still aligned with the initiatives of the company. And then ultimately, instead of talking about renewal, you're really talking about the return on investment with that executive. And you're hopefully able to say, hey, here's what we helped you achieve over this last year. These are the things that you really cared about, and here's where we got to on that stuff. And so that's the difference between these two relationships. And you can see that the conversation is very different. Now, I want to point out one thing that I'm sure many of you are thinking, and that's that, okay, this is wonderful, Kristen, and it assumes that you started having these conversations right at the beginning of the customer relationship. And I realize that most of you have inherited a base of accounts and you don't have an executive relationship with a lot of them, if any of them. And so you've got to be starting kind of midstream to develop that relationship and start having some of these conversations. I think it's okay, even if you're in the middle of a relationship with a client, as long as you can find the right person, get in touch with them and get a conversation going. To kind of go back to what I'm showing here at the beginning as value discovery, start having some of those conversations with that executive level, buyer level person, and then you can kind of go from there. And so don't be afraid to jump in the middle of a client relationship and try to develop this executive relationship. It may not be successful. It's always much more successful to do this from the very beginning because you've set the expectation right from the start. But even if you could get half of your customers to, kind of develop this executive relationship with you, you are 50% less likely to get blindsided by churn. So keep in mind that this is a really important relationship to build, even if you're inheriting a base of accounts. I want to talk really quickly about how you do that. So one of the things that it's really important to do is to understand the value that the customer is expecting to receive from your system. It's very easy to sort of get caught up in your own marketing materials and think that the marketing materials have outlined very thoroughly everything that a customer loves about your system. And that's just not true. Marketing teams have to be general because that's how they can go to market effectively. But as customer success professionals, it's important that you understand for each client that you work with what they value about your solution. Why did they buy it in the first place? The two buckets that we sort of always think about in terms of value are revenue and time. So revenue is really, how does your solution help them do things like increase sales or reduce churn or lower costs? Time is how does your solution help them save time or increase their efficiency or limit manual work, things like that. But there are some other categories as well that I think are really important. Brand is one. So sometimes your solution, they might have bought your solution to help with their brand. Maybe it develops the consistency of their brand or increases awareness of their brand or improves their brand's reputation. They might have bought it to help with their customers, so your customers' customers. So it helps them maybe build engagement or improve the experience or minimizes friction with those customers. They might have bought it, this is kind of a hidden category, their employees. So, you know, if you've created efficiencies in with your solution, they might have purchased it, yes, to get those efficiencies, but also to make their employees happier with the work that they're doing. So creating engagement, reducing turnover, enabling recruiting, those are all reasons that companies purchase as well. And then finally, mission-driven companies especially care about their mission. And so they might have purchased your solution to create awareness of their mission or improve engagement with their mission or develop some community around that. So it's important to not assume that you know why a customer purchased your solution. You have to ask the questions to find out. And so, you know, as you're thinking about what a customer values about your solution, they usually value several things on this list. And this is by no means a comprehensive list. This is just to kind of give you some ideas. I wanted to tell you a story about one of our customers. So we worked with a company back in 2016. And this company had a product that was geared for large retail companies, and it was a training tool. It was a tool that sat in front of the recruiting process. So a candidate would come into this product, take some training, and then they could apply for a retail position in a large retailer like a Old Navy or a Williams-Sonoma. And so, you know, that was the solution that the customer had that they were selling. And their assumption was that the reason that their customers were buying this solution was because they wanted to reduce turnover. The idea being that, you know, if somebody made it all the way through the training and they went ahead and applied anyway, they would be coming in as a higher qualified candidate. And so the quality of candidates would go up. But the company was running into issues where people were churning out of their pilot program. And so we came in and did a little bit of training with the team on how to ask good questions. And as they started asking questions of their customers about why they had purchased the solution in the first place and what they were hoping to get out of it, they found that in many cases it had nothing to do with reducing turnover. One of the customers purchased it because they didn't have a very good reputation in the market for candidates, and they were trying to use that tool as a way to boost their reputation. Another one of their customers had purchased it because they were actually trying to front load some of the cost of the training. And so that, you know, when a candidate came on board, they had less training to go through and they could be up to speed a lot more quickly. So for them, it was all about speed of getting somebody through the onboarding process. There were about 12 different reasons why various customers that we talked to and the salespeople talked to, that were the reasons why these companies had purchased the system to begin with, and they had nothing to do with turnover. So, you know, that company had kind of gotten caught up in their own marketing speak and made the assumption that that's why people were buying it. And when they really started asking questions, they found that that wasn't it at all. And so as you engage with executives, it is absolutely critical that you understand why that person bought the solution, because they're the one that's expecting a return on investment at the end. And so it's important to kind of think about the value that they see in your solution. One of the tools that you can use to get there is to ask really good questions. There's a lot of methodologies for this. We teach one in one of our classes called Asking Good Questions, but these are two kinds of questions that you can ask that really help people think about what they value about your solution. So an impact question is a question about the effects or consequences or implications of the customer's problem on their business. So if you were to ask an executive, hey, you know, what problem were you trying to solve with our solution? And they say, oh, well, I was trying to solve our employee turnover problem. You could then ask an impact question and say, what, you know, what is that costing your business each year? Or is employee turnover having an impact on other employees in the company? Are you getting a negative reputation? Are you seeing lower scores on Glassdoor? You can start to really probe and ask questions about how much that problem is impacting their business. And you can start to get a really good feel for what they can be, where you can be focusing in terms of goal setting with that client. Value questions are questions about the value or usefulness of solving a problem that the customer has expressed. And so, you've already come in and you've got a solution that they're using. So you can ask pretty general questions here. Things like, what do you see as the biggest value of our solution? And how can we help you see some real results here? And that can give you great insights as well. People love to talk about themselves. Some of the CSMs I talk to have a really hard time feeling comfortable with asking impact questions. They feel like they're a little invasive, or they can be too negative, or they can uncover negative things about the customer's business. You actually want to do that because you want that executive thinking about how your solution can help them solve those problems. So if you're someone who feels uncomfortable with those kinds of questions, I would challenge you to just ask one and sort of build up your comfort level with those. Executives deal with negative stuff all the time. You're not going to offend them. The worst thing that you might get when you ask a question like that is I don't feel like answering it. And then you just move on. So this is a tool that you can put in your toolkit. It's really important when you're working with executives to be very results focused. A big part of the reason that an executive has the job that they have is because they are goal oriented. Goal setting and talking about results is something that executives do all the time. I find that many CSMs haven't done much goal setting and are a little hesitant to talk about results, especially negative results. And it's important to note that executives eat results for breakfast. Like, this is something they're doing all the time. A negative result isn't the end of the world for them. It's an opportunity for improvement. And so, that's how executives are looking at it. So please don't be nervous about presenting results. The way that you can do this with an executive, and again, you want to start this when you start the relationship with the executive, is to set the expectation that you're going to be setting goals together. You can select 2 to 5 of those key expectations or outcomes that you found out about when you did your question asking, and then you can work with that client to develop concrete goals to help them achieve those outcomes. From there, you can create a goal plan. Here, you just want to use a consistent format. There's a lot of different formats out there. There's a book called Farm Don't Hunt that has a really good format. We have a format that we use in our goals and outcomes class. You just want to find one that's easy to read and works really well for presentations. I like color coding. I think that that's a great way to indicate whether a goal was achieved or missed. You can just use red, yellow, green, or be fancy and match your brand if you want to, but make sure that it's easy to understand, and then just be consistent across your customer success team so that if your client gets handed off to another CSM in the future, that CSM is continuing with the method that you've already set up with your client. You need to be candid when you're talking about results. You want to review both the positive and the negative results. And if you have negative results, you want to be able to talk about why you believe those results are the way they are. And then you want to ask the executive to tell you their opinion too. And then you want to discuss what you're going to be doing to improve the negative results. And then also ask the executive if they have any ideas on that as well. What you'll find this does is, rather than create a lot of negative conversation, it actually creates a really positive, solution-focused dialogue with your clients. So this is a great way to kind of talk about results in a really formatted way, but leave a lot of room for some dialogue, which is what you're really trying to do. Finally, you want to make sure you're providing value. I'm not going to go through all of the content here, but I think that the thing I want to emphasize is that providing value to executives is really easy. You can position yourself to be a trusted business advisor to the executive. Executives don't have a lot of time. That is their most valuable and most protected resource. And while we would all love to be reading all these industry articles and customer success articles and stuff like that, A lot of executives just don't really have the time to do that they wish they had. So if you can become the person who is providing them with interesting articles about your industry, or notifications about webinars or events that are coming up, or new books or articles about business, things like that, all of that stuff can be really valuable to the executive. And you may feel like, oh, who am I to be providing business advice to the senior executive? Try to not feel that way, because you're basically providing something that the executive knows in their head that they should have read, but probably didn't have time to do it. So you're basically being someone who's serving up a single serving helping of business knowledge to this person who really wants and needs it. And so that's what you do to provide value. So this can become something that you do on a monthly cadence that can help to build a trusted advisor relationship with this executive. Finally, best practices. So, as you're talking to an executive, you want to think about data and facts, be really direct and candid, ask questions, and then wait and listen for answers. One thing that I find with a lot of CSMs is they sort of feel like when they're having a conversation with an executive, they sort of treat it like the conversation they're having with their key contact, where they are the expert. When you're talking to an executive, it's a dialogue. And so if you ask a question, shut up. This silence is powerful. If you've ever taken one of our classes at the Success League, you'll notice that when I ask a question of the group, I don't speak again until somebody jumps into the discussion. People are very uncomfortable with silence and will eventually speak. Executives are people who really want to be careful about what they say. So sometimes they need a little bit of time to think about their answer. So don't just ramble and jump in and talk over the executive. Give them some time to answer the questions that you ask. Respect their time. Everyone likes to get back a little time in their day. So if you've covered all of the topics that you had planned for your meeting or your call or your EBR, just end early. And then finally, say thank you. This is really important. Not enough people send thank you notes or thank you emails, so make sure you do that as well. So with that, we're trying to keep it kind of tight today, so I'm going to wrap up and we're going to open it up for questions. Before we do that, I wanted to let you know that we cover a lot of the topics I spoke about today in much more depth in our online class series. If you want more information about that, you can go to our website and visit our training page. We also have a popular coaching program for customer success leaders, and if you're interested in learning more about that, you can reach out to me directly. My email's here. We have a newsletter, we have a podcast, so if you'd like more information about both, you can visit the blog page on our website and sign up to receive a weekly update on everything at the Success League. And with that, we're going to go to Q&A. What questions do people have?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kristen. We do have some really awesome questions already. Really encourage everyone to go into the Q&A box and send us more as we answer those first ones. But Kristen, one first question from Kenyon here is, what if you come into an account and you do not have any contacts? How would you go about finding who the best person to contact is without seeming like a cold calling salesperson?
Yes, that's a really great question. So the first thing you should try, and this doesn't always work, but it's the best way to sort of graciously try, is ask the person who is your day-to-day contact who their boss is. And the way that you can kind of position that is that you want to help them look really good in front of their boss. And, really, if you're doing executive business reviews, some people call them quarterly business reviews, they're not really a quarterly business review unless you've got that executive in there. So you need to be doing a little bit of digging. If you can't get that information from your key contact, LinkedIn is your best friend. So do a little bit of research on LinkedIn and find out who that person is, and you can reach out and say, hey, I wanted to reach out. I'm from this company. We're working with so-and-so on your team. I just wanted to reach out and say hi and let you know how things are going. Do you have a few minutes? It's completely appropriate to do that. I know it's not an ideal situation. In a perfect world, we'd all have relationships with these folks from the very beginning. One other thing you can think about is if your salesperson who sold to that customer is still around in your company, you can hit them up for the person that they had the relationship with, who they sold the solution to. That's usually that executive level person, and they may be able to introduce you as well.
Awesome. Cool. We have multiple questions here that kind of all go into the same direction, so I'm going to try to synthesize all of them. Lots of people are wondering, how do you get the attention of the executive in the first place? So from whether, like, how do you even get them on the phone to even start engaging with you, to how do you, motivate them to attend a QBR or an EBR? How do you get that first spark of attention?
Yeah, again, in a perfect world, you get this from the very beginning by setting the expectation that you want to have a relationship with this person, and really starting from the very beginning with that value discovery conversation. I realize, though, you don't always get that opportunity, and for those of you who have bases of accounts where you're now kind of in the middle of the relationship and you don't have that executive relationship built, you can do a couple things. Some of the tips that I just shared can be useful, so you might want to enlist the help of your key contacts in getting that person into the EBR. The executive business review should really be a chance for your key contact and you to kind of show off the results you've been getting to that executive. So if you can kind of get them on your side and say, hey, this is our chance. Let's go show the return on investment that we're proving with this solution. You can usually get them on your side because they want to look good too. They have an interest in that. If they're a little tougher, or if you have a key contact that's sort of protective of their boss, which sometimes happens, what you can start to do is you can I'm going to click back a few slides into this slide here. You can start to more subtly provide value by starting to email or call them with some of this information. So really going into specifically industry information can be really helpful, where you sort of say, hey, executive, I wanted to make sure you knew about this upcoming event in our industry. If you're going to be there, I'd love to meet you. Or, hey, this article just came out. I don't know if you got a chance to see that. Over time, if you do that enough, maybe you decide you want to do that on a monthly basis. Over time, they're going to start to see you as somebody who has a lot of valuable industry information, and then you become that trusted business advisor. That really warms them up to you. So if you're in a situation where you've kind of got a blocker in your key contact, you can kind of use that more subtle method to get those executives engaged.
Awesome. Another question here from Tracy is, how do you reach out to your main contact's manager or executive without upsetting your main point of contact?
Well, ideally, this is all one team. So you've maybe told your key contact that you want to reach out to that person. The way that you can position that to your key contact is to say, hey, look, we're getting a lot of really great results. I want to show those results off to your boss. And I want to make sure that we've secured renewal for this coming year. Let's work together on this. Can you introduce me? And, then they're kind of on your team. Again, if they're kind of a blocker, you can do that more subtle method that I just described of kind of reaching out with useful information. You may have to have a challenging conversation with your key contact where you say, hey, look, for me to do my job of being a good customer success manager for your company, I need a relationship with both of you. And it's not that I don't love you, and it's not that I don't think that, we're doing great work together, but, it's really critical for both of us that I have that relationship in place so that we can make sure you can continue to use our solution in the future. And that I have a very clear understanding of what that person is expecting from this. And so, I think you can try to go about it the easier ways first, and I would definitely recommend doing that. But if you've got a really tough person who's kind of blocking you from their boss, you might have to have that challenging conversation and really try to understand why that person may not be wanting you to talk to that person. Usually it's a power thing. And if you can kind of have an honest dialogue about it, you can uncover what's really going on, and you can help that person have a better relationship even with their boss. So I would not sort of set it aside. I would actually address it head on.
Awesome. A question from Kayla here is, should the cadence of the communication with the executive be the same or similar to the one that you have with a manager or daily user?
Probably not. I mean, the reality is executives don't have a ton of time. I think that you know, you should strive for once a month, unless you're in a really low touch program. If you're in a high touch customer success program or even a medium touch program, you should be shooting to communicate in some way with that executive once a month. But that doesn't mean you have to actually place a phone call or schedule a meeting once a month. It's shooting them an article once a month, or, you know, some of the things on the slide that we're sitting on right now can be a part of what you do. And then maybe every third month or every 6th month, you're including them in an executive business review where the conversation is a little richer. So it's not like a, you know, admin or key contact level person where maybe you're talking to them weekly or in some cases daily if they've got problems. It's never going to be that frequent.
Awesome. Okay, I think we can answer maybe a couple of more questions before we have to wrap up.
Okay.
So let's try to answer this one and then maybe a next one if we have time.
Perfect.
Bill is wondering, how do you have a frank results conversation with your executive when it might make your sponsor look bad?
Well, hopefully if you're starting from the very beginning with this process of doing some goal setting, I'm going to skip back to this slide a little bit. A couple of things have happened. First of all, when you had that value conversation, you probably uncovered several things that they were after. So they're not just after one result, they're after many results. So if they're after many results, what usually happens, and why I recommend that you have 2 to 5 key expectations that you set goals on, is if you only set goals on one and it's not going so great, that's a much tougher conversation than if you've got several goals, say 3, 2 of them are going really well and the other one isn't. So you can kind of soften that conversation a little bit by going into it with several things that you're trying to accomplish for the customer instead of just one. If you've got a tough situation where maybe your key contact is a blocker or is, you know, doing some things that are really limiting the results of the solution that you're providing, you may have to have a private conversation with the executive about what's really going on. It's one of those difficult conversations, and I would not do that with the executive before you try to have that difficult conversation with your key contact. So you need to try to solve the problem at your key contact level first. But if you're finding that that person is really part of the issue, you may need to escalate to their boss. And it's a really tough thing to do. Hopefully none of you have to do this all that often. But if you do have to do that, I would recommend planning that conversation out really well. And there's we teach a class on difficult conversations. So if you want to get into this more, we can, we do that in this class, but there's a technique called the Mimi and technique of talking to an executive, where you can say something like, I really have enjoyed working with my key contacts, and I'm finding it really difficult to get the results that you're looking for because of these things that this person is doing. So that it conveys both that you really like the work you're doing with the key contact and that there are things that are not going so well as well. So you can be really careful about how you present it, so you're not just, you know, flat out throwing that person under the bus, because you don't want to do that. But it is your job to make sure that you're delivering results for their organization. And the ultimate person that you are responsible to is the person who's writing you the check. So, you know, keep that in mind and take that responsibility if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that helps. That's a really tough situation.
Yeah. Um, Another question on top of this, and then we'll have just
Okay.
one more before we close. But in this cases, do you think that director level contact is executive enough, or do you suggest pushing all the way to VP level?
It depends on the company. In large companies, the director level is probably fine. In smaller organizations, it may even be the CEO or some other C-level person that you're working with who's really the decision maker. What you're looking for is not so much title, you're looking for the person who owns the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the person who needs to see results from you in order to actually renew your contract for the next year. So it will vary a lot from company to company.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, one last question as we wrap up. You mentioned doing a training for your team on asking good questions. Do you have any resources, recommendations for that type of training from Nicole?
Yeah, so I think that one book that I really enjoy and it's an older book. It's called Spin Selling, worst title ever. But the methodology in it is really solid. So if you are looking for a methodology for asking good questions, they have a very well-researched, very data-driven approach that I think works really well and is very easy to learn. So if you get that book, it's called Spin, S-P-I-N, Selling. Chapter 4 is the chapter that really goes into detail on that methodology.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen, for answering all those questions. We do have a lot of questions, so thank you so much to everyone who sent us yeah, all of those questions. And I hope maybe if you want to go back to the slide with your contact info,
Oh, yeah, here.
I mean, I'm assuming you're okay with people reaching out to you by
I
email if
would
they have more questions.
absolutely, I would love to hear from you. Actually, this week, the rest of this week is fairly slow, so I could probably get back to you right away if you have a question. But I love talking about this stuff. I hope that you found it helpful and are encouraged to go out and build relationships with executives. And with that, I'll say thanks. And thanks, Matilda, for including me today.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. And Kristen, thanks so much for the presentation today. It was amazing. So looking forward to sharing the recording with everyone. And I hope everyone has an amazing end of their Wednesday.